I think the problem with trying to come up with a metric to measure, we don't truly understand fatigue. So we can't truly measure something that we don't really understand how it, I mean, we know it exists, but how does it truly affect performance? Like most of the research, like, you know, old school powerlifting myth is, you know, your CNS gets fried from lifting heavy and that's how you get burnt out and stuff. But if you look in the literature, most researchers have an extremely hard time even getting the nervous system to respond to that high of a level. And I think one of the studies that actually showed that the nervous system had some negative effects showed that it recovered in 20 minutes. And it theorized that the other studies couldn't find any because they didn't check quick enough for some of the metrics. So, you know, if we're assuming that high intensity work is, you know, frying our nervous system, I just, to me, that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't go with what I see, and it just doesn't go with, like, you know, those of us who've played other sports, and, like, this is the example I use a lot, like, to my lifters in the gym. Let's say we're doing a really heavy triple on a squat, takes 9 or 10 seconds. That's literally 2 plays in football. So, like, the workload is, you know, it's a matter of perspective. And, like, in football, there's, you know, might be a change of direction, there's a collision, there's, like, the work is probably even more in that football play than it is for that triple in the squat. But, you know, if they're equal, if one's more than the other, like, whatever, you kind of get my point with it, that I don't think we're doing that much work in the gym. And if you listen to some of the stories, and granted, these are all N=1 and stuff, but, you know, I was watching a 30-30 on Junior Seau last week, and you hear this about even other competitive athletes too. He would wake up at 6 a.m. and go hit the gym, and he said he was hitting it hard, and he was doing it because everyone else was asleep. And then midday, he'd take his friends on the team that he wanted to be better athletes and bring them to the gym, hit it hard again. Then he'd train in the gym with the team, and then he'd go practice football. And the guy played almost 20 years in the NFL. Like, granted, that's an N=1, but, you know, there are countless stories that are like this. You know, I'm from New England, so a Patriots reference, Ty Law wrote a letter to himself once he got, you know, his younger self, once he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it was the same thing, waking up early, putting in extra work. And that was always, like, the mentality of team sports. Like, we put in the extra work, but it just seems like in powerlifting, and I'm not sure how weightlifting falls with this trend, but it seems that it's, be careful of doing too much work because your nervous system could get fried, you could get hurt, where you just don't see the, like, you know, those NFL guys aren't even taking our sport into consideration when they're doing our sport plus their sport. And granted, they're obviously doing a little bit less in the gym and stuff, but, like, I think fatigue is just one of those things that we just absolutely do not understand. We can't fully understand with our current technology and our current understanding of the human body in general. And to try to put metrics on it, I think is going to handcuff us no matter what.
Do you think some of that comes from the expectation that's set from the tradition in the sport and the narrative that a lot of this stuff is predictable, even though it's not?
So I actually think the majority of, like, when a lifter feels tired a few days after a training session, I think a lot of it is cultural and expectation bias, because that's what we read, and, like, that's what those, like, older generation of power lifters kind of just built. I was listening, so Mike Teixeira has a podcast where he gets, like, a lot of these older guys on the I think it's the Titans of Powerlifting it's called, and Bo Moore, who I think he's 57 years old, and the guy in the animal cage last year totaled 2,000 pounds in knee sleeves in, like, a half an hour. Like, he's still moving big weight. He's competed in over 100 competitions. And he was talking, so Mike or the other guy in the podcast had asked him a question about taking time off. And he goes, I don't like taking time off because my mind has a hard time being able to handle the heavier weights again. So he basically gets out of a meet, takes very little time off, and just starts, and it's basically like the Bulgarian method for powerlifting, what he does. He works up to heavy singles every day. And another thing that I really liked about what he said was, so if something's not going well, so I think he used the bench as an example. before he got to the top set that he expected, it was feeling heavy, so he went down, and this is like a weightlifting thing that I kind of steal in the gym too. He went back down, put chains on the bar, and just worked up using, loading the bar up with X amount of chains, and then worked up to a heavy single that ended up being heavier at the top than what he would have taken previously. So he found a way to get a win on that training day. And I found like some of those aspects kind of cool. And he's had like Brad Gillingham on here, who competed on that podcast, who competed in 26 straight national level competitions without being injured. Like these guys are lifting hard in big weights frequently. And I think, and he made a good point that he's not on drugs. And I think a big part of those beliefs and like those injuries that you were seeing was because, the drug use that's been involved in this sport, like the tissue tolerance of it just doesn't keep up over time. But the ones who are just kind of doing things right seem to be able to still compete at a high level later on. And it's not just one person. Like your Tony Harris's, Dave Ricks, like you could literally just name a ton of these competitive world level lifters that are still competing at the world level at a higher training age.
Simple question to ask those guys, or like the two examples that you used earlier, Junior Seau and Ty Laws. Well, what did you guys do when you were really, really tired? I wonder if they would just say, well, I just didn't go as hard. Or I just took that day off. What do you mean? Yeah, no big deal. Where I feel like we overcomplicate things a bit. But you mentioned fatigue management is we're not good at it, and I think we're scared of fatigue. So when there's any hint of it, the alarm bells go off, like something needs to change. Oh, we need to change this up, change this drastically. Oh, you deload or move to a new phase or something like that. When, like you said, training is a skill. So if the athlete over time understands what matters and what doesn't, and also understands that they may wake up feeling like shit, but go into the gym and feel like a monster, and vice versa too. You could wake up feeling like $1 million, and when you hit the bar, it's like, wow, I feel like garbage. I didn't realize it until it happens either way, but you don't know until you go in there and start moving. So it just goes back to your approach, where people might listen to this and say, well, we're all just advocating just to go hard or go home. It's not that at all. It's allowing Mother Nature to dictate progress. I mean, you're using general principles of training to guide the individual. But that's why the individual is so important, is because we can't take these general principles on a spreadsheet and expect the individual to react in the exact way.
With the fatigue aspect too, I think in a lot of cases when we see down performance, right? Like, one of the things that we talk about around here a lot is expect to feel pain sometimes, because it's those unexpected consequences that we tend to freak out about. And it's the same thing. You need to expect down performance days. So I think in a lot of cases, when things don't happen in a linear fashion like we want them to or we expect them to, we want to find an answer to that question. So it's, I must be tired. That my nutrition must be affecting this. My sleep must be affecting this. And the interesting thing that I find with like a lot of my lifters is they want to blame the program right away. Like, something's wrong with the program, and those things happen. It's a non-linear process. There will be progressions, there will be regressions, there will be skips, there will be jumps, and you need to be able to deal with that noise. And as a coach, and the experience level of the coach, I think, plays into this. It's, the coach needs to identify when it's just noise and not respond and let things happen. And the coach needs to be able to identify when it's not just noise, it's a dip in performance for another reason, and we need to adjust some things. The lifter needs to be able to identify when it's noise, and the lifter needs to be able to identify when they might need something different in their program. And until like the coach and the lifter can get on that same level, it can be difficult. But it's a long-term process, and this is why sticking with a coach too is so important, is because you build that relationship over time, and once you guys are on the same page, that's when you start to see like bigger and bigger things happen.